A recent analysis estimates 7.8 million people will struggle to repay student loans if a federal pause on payments ends as planned in May. That's according to the California Policy Lab and Student Loan Law Initiative. Payments were halted at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic as the nation dealt with an economic crisis. The pause was extended several times. With payments set to resume on May 1st, many people are calling on the Biden administration to extend the pause again. CBS News reporter Sarah-Ewall Wice has been looking into this and joins me now with more. Hi there, Sarah. So as we spelled out, this really affects millions of Americans across the country. What kinds of ripple effects could we see once this pause on federal student loan repayments ends?
Hi, Elaine. Yeah, keep in mind that we've seen more than 37 million people not have to pay student loans since the beginning of the pandemic. So if this does restart in May, it could be the first time millions of people have had to pay their student loans in more than 2 years. And, you know, we have seen this pause extended multiple times under the Trump administration and then again under the Biden administration. So there are still questions on whether it will actually end in May. But there have been a number of different advocates who have warned that this could be a serious challenge for borrowers. A recent survey found that more than 90% of borrowers that they spoke to had said they were concerned about paying student loans as well as other costs when we see that inflation is on the rise. So while the pandemic might be easing in some cases for many people, we have seen costs go up across the board, across the United States, inflation hitting 7.9% year over year. So it has raised concerns, and some borrowers have said they've had to start looking at their expenses and seeing what they can cut down on, including things that are very basic, like trying to figure out how they can cut down on some of their utilities, how they can cut down on other things to make sure that they can make these payments should they resume in about a month from now. Another thing that we know is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has been looking at this. They said that the student loan payment pause has saved borrowers about $195 billion over the past 2 years. When those payments start come May, they expect that the number of delinquencies, those who are behind on their payments, will rise substantially moving forward. So that is something to keep in mind. Of course, some people do say, we're expecting no matter what, whether there is a lot or very few, there's always going to be some people who are behind on student loan payments.
So, Sarah, what should people be doing now to prepare should payments restart as scheduled May 1st?
Yeah, so there's a number of steps that student loan experts have been talking to me about that people should be taking now, whether they are expecting those loan payments to start a month from now or for there to be another extension of that pause. And the first thing that everyone has said to me is that borrowers should be reaching out and making sure that their student loan servicers have their updated contact information. If they haven't had to pay loans in 2 years, they could have moved during the pandemic. There's a lot of changes that could have happened. So they want to make sure that people have their updated contact information with their student loan servicers so that they can get the most up-to-date information because these servicers are required to send out a number of notices before payments resume. So that is step one that I've been told should happen and people should be looking at. The other thing I've been told is even if we're not quite sure if this will happen a month from now, people should start looking at their budgets and seeing how they can make sure that they're able to make these payments. Something to keep in mind, even if the pause ends on May 1st, it'll be several weeks before these payments actually resume. It's not like we're gonna see 30+ million student loan payments start on the 1st of May. Those will happen over a number of weeks after the pause ends. But what we do know is that the average student loan payment is about $400 a month. So that is a substantial chunk of money, and people should start preparing, even if they see an extension, for their budgets to accommodate that come May.
Yeah, first step, though, really important, as you say, make sure that contact info is updated because, we know a lot of people have moved around with remote work conditions especially. So really starts there. So we know that a group of Democratic lawmakers sent a letter to the Biden administration Thursday calling for an extension on the pause. They also want to see a cancellation of student debt. Where does the White House currently stand on this issue?
There have been some mixed signals on extending the pause. One of the reasons is servicers have not been sending out notices about student loan payments resuming. When we've had the payment resuming originally in February, but about 2 months before, there had been multiple notices going out to borrowers telling them. So that's one signal that makes people think maybe they're going to extend this. Another thing that we know is that the White House Chief of Staff said in an interview at the beginning of March that they're still trying to figure out if there's some kind of executive action that can be taken on student loans, on student debt. As we know, a number of Democrats have called for the cancellation of student debt. And so he said, should they not make the announcement on what that is between now and payments resuming, they would extend the pause further. So that has also led people to believe that we'll actually see an extension. What we don't know is actually what they're going to do in terms of canceling student debt. What we do know is that the president has called for Congress to take action in terms of canceling student debt. He's also talked about $10,000 of student debt being canceled. But when we look at the Congress and the makeup of it right now, it's very closely divided between Democrats and Republicans. So the actual reality is there's really not a lot that can actually pass in Congress in terms of canceling student debt. And that's why a number of Democrats have called on the president to cancel student debt. And they're calling for a much larger amount, about $50,000 when you talk to Senator Chuck Schumer or someone like Senator Elizabeth Warren. That's how much they want the president to cancel. The White House says they're still examining that really, but haven't come down definitively either way for or against whether they can take action in terms of the White House taking action unilaterally.
All right, a lot of folks paying very close attention to this. Sarah-Ewall Wice. Sarah, thanks for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.